Chapter 1. Dust on Her Boots. The town of Red Rock simmered beneath the late afternoon sun, its single street cloaked in heat and dust. Wagons rattled past, horses stamped nervously at the hitching rails, and the air carried the mingled scent of sweat, whiskey, and horses. The saloon doors creaked as they swung open and shut, spilling laughter, the sharp notes of piano, and the clinking of glasses into the street. Clara Monroe dragged her boots through the grit, her skirts heavy with dust. Her hat, too big for her slight frame, cast a shadow over her pale face, but nothing could hide the weariness in her eyes. She paused before the mercantile, smoothing her apron with trembling hands, and pushed inside. The wooden floor groaned under her steps. Shelves of dry goods loomed around her, but the shopkeeper, a gray-bearded man with spectacles, barely glanced up. "Sir," Clara said softly, voice rasped from thirst, "I can work. Stock shelves, sweep floors, anything." The man shook his head without looking. "Ain't got use for another pair of hands. Not for someone who looks like the wind might knock her over." His words stung, but Clara forced a tight smile, nodding politely before backing out. She tried again at the dressmaker's shop, then the livery, each rejection heavier than the last. By the time she reached the saloon steps, her knees buckled, and she sank onto the edge of the boardwalk. The saloon's music and laughter seemed cruel, mocking. Her fingers twisted in her skirt as she whispered to herself, "Don't cry. Not here. Not now." That was when the sound of hooves drew close. A rider slowed his horse, a tall figure astride a bay stallion. Dust swirled around him, catching the dying light of the sun until he seemed carved out of gold and shadow. He swung down, spurs ringing against the boards as his boots hit the ground. "You looking to fall over, miss," the man said, his voice low and steady. Clara lifted her head, startled by the stranger's sharp blue eyes. His hat brim cast most of his face in shadow, but the line of his jaw was hard, weathered by sun and wind. I can work," she blurted. "Please, I just need a chance." He studied her for a long moment, silence stretching between them like a drawn rope. The noise of the saloon faded, leaving only the faint cry of a coyote in the distance. "You don't look like you need work," he said at last, his tone gentler than his words. "You look like you need rest." Her throat tightened. No one had spoken to her that way in years. She opened her mouth to protest, but he tipped his hat and added, "Name's Colt McGraw. You can stand here begging every man in Red Rock, or you can ride with me. Your choice." Clara stared at him, heart hammering, dust clinging to her boots as the sun sank low over the prairie. For the first time since she left her old life behind, hope flickered like fire in the desert wind. Chapter 2. A Cowboy's Offer. The trail out of Red Rock was long and lonesome, stretching toward the horizon where the prairie burned orange beneath the sinking sun. Clara sat stiffly on Colt McGraw's horse, her hands clutching the saddle horn. She wasn't used to the animal's steady sway beneath her, and every step jarred her bones. Colt walked alongside, reins loose in his callous hand, his hat pulled low against the dying light. She stole a glance at him. He didn't say much, only the occasional word to calm the stallion, or a glance skyward, as if reading the weather in the clouds. He carried himself like a man who had seen storms and lived through them, his silence a shield. "I can work for my keep," Clara said finally, breaking the hush of crickets rising with the dusk. "I can scrub floors, mend clothes, cook if you've got a kitchen. I don't want charity." Colt's boots crunched against the gravel. He didn't look at her right away. When he did, his blue eyes caught the last flare of sunlight. "Don't need another cook. Don't need another pair of hands," he said evenly. "What I reckon you need is a roof and a chance to breathe without begging for it." Clara's throat tightened. She turned her face toward the prairie, watching shadows stretch like fingers across the land. "I've been breathing just fine on my own. Colt's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Don't sound like it. The way you near dropped in the street. The sting of truth pricked her pride. She gripped the saddle horn harder, wishing she could will away the trembling in her arms. They rode on until the town was only a smudge behind them. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off, and the prairie wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Finally, Colt spoke again, his voice softer. You don't owe me work. You don't owe me nothing. You can rest beside me if that's what you need. Her head snapped toward him, heart leaping at the words. The way he said it, it wasn't a proposition, wasn't a trap. It was an offering, spoken plain and true. Yet she didn't know how to accept kindness without suspicion. I've always had to earn my place, she whispered. Everywhere I've been. Men don't give without expecting something back. Colt stopped walking. His hand rested lightly on the reins as he looked up at her. I ain't every man, Clara. You'll learn that soon enough. The weight of his gaze rooted her to the saddle. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let the walls around her heart crumble. But trust was a dangerous thing in a land where everything, water, food, even love, came at a cost. The prairie stretched endless before them, the sky fading to violet. Somewhere out there lay Colt's ranch, and with it, perhaps, the chance at something she had never known, a place to rest, not just survive. Clara drew in a shaky breath and whispered, Then I'll ride with you, Mr. McGraw. For the first time, he smiled just a flicker, but it was enough to steady her in the saddle as the night wrapped around them both. Chapter 3. Shadows at the Ranch. By the time they reached Colt McGraw's ranch, the prairie was cloaked in silver moonlight. The house stood simple but strong, timber walls weathered by wind, a lantern flickering warm in the window. Beyond the fence stretched a corral, horses shifting in the dark, their silhouettes restless beneath the star-dusted sky. Clara slid stiffly off the saddle, her legs nearly buckling from the long ride. She steadied herself with a hand on the fence, embarrassed by her weakness. Colt swung down easily, his spurs ringing, and tied off the stallion without a word. He carried himself like the land itself, solid, unyielding, yet edged with a quiet danger. House is this way, he said, nodding toward the porch. Clara followed, her boot scuffing against the packed earth. The porch steps creaked under her weight, and she paused as a cool breeze lifted her hair. She thought of all the places she had begged for shelter, barns, kitchens, strangers' floorboards, but none of them had felt like this, a man's home, and the uncertainty of what it might mean. Inside, the ranch house smelled of wood smoke and leather. A fire crackled low on the hearth, throwing amber light across the room. A rifle rested above the mantel, and a pair of worn saddlebags lay tossed in the corner. Clara's eyes lingered on them, then shifted to Colt. You live alone? She asked. Reckon I do, he answered, shrugging off his coat. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. Haven't always been so. Rode with men once, men who ain't welcome at this fire no more. There was a shadow in his voice, a memory that clung like dust. Clara felt it, heavy and unspoken, yet she didn't press. She knew the way to pass best left buried. I can work, she said again, eager to prove her worth. Let me tend the barn, clean cook. Before she could finish, her knees gave out. She caught herself on the table, breath shallow, face pale. Colt crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands steadying her shoulders. Easy now, he murmured. His touch was firm but careful, like a man used to holding reins more than women. You're spent, Clara. Nothing left to prove tonight. Her chest heaved, shame burning hot on her cheeks. I don't want to be a burden. He tilted her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his. The firelight caught the scars etched along his jaw, marks of another life, another fight. Burden? His voice dropped low, rough as gravel. You ain't that. You're just tired. You need rest more than any work. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, the silence between them deepened, the air thick with unspoken things. The fire popped, the wind whispered through the eaves, and somewhere outside a horse snorted in the dark. Clara swallowed hard, her defenses faltering under his gaze. In the glow of Colt's hearth, she realized she wasn't standing in the house of a stranger anymore, but on the edge of something dangerous and tender, something that might change the course of her weary life. Chapter 4, Gunsmoke and Secrets. The next morning, Clara woke to the cry of a rooster and the smell of coffee drifting through the ranch house. She stretched stiffly, her body still aching from travel, and rose to find Colt already outside, splitting wood. Each swing of his axe rang sharp through the morning air, echoing across the quiet prairie. For a fleeting moment, she felt safe. But safety in the West never lasted long. By midday, Colt hitched up the wagon to haul feed into town, and Clara insisted on riding along. The road into Red Rock stretched wide and empty, yet Clara couldn't shake the uneasy feeling prickling at her skin. Colt rode silent beside her, his hand never straying far from the revolver at his hip. The town looked different in daylight, harsher somehow. As they pulled up to the Mercantile, a pair of rough-looking men lounged outside the saloon, their hats low and eyes sharp. Clara felt their stares like knives. One of them spat into the dust, then straightened with a smirk. "Well, I'll be damned. Colt McGraw." Colt stiffened. His jaw tightened, though his face remained calm. "Ain't a name you need to speak, Wade," he replied evenly. The man, Wade, laughed, showing a row of yellow teeth. "You always did think you could walk away clean. But men like us, we don't get clean. We ride together or we die alone." His gaze flicked to Clara, sharp as a blade. "And looks like you found yourself something worth losing." Clara's stomach dropped. She gripped the wagon seat, her breath coming fast. Colt shifted subtly, placing himself between her and the men. "You keep her name out of your mouth," he said, his voice low, dangerous. His hand hovered near his revolver. The street had gone still, townsfolk peeking from windows, the saloon piano falling silent. The air hung heavy, as if the whole town held its breath. Wade's smirk widened, but he tipped his hat mockingly. "We'll be seeing you, McGraw. You can't run from blood." With that, the men turned and sauntered into the saloon, boots thudding against the boardwalk. Clara realized her hands were trembling. Colt's eyes stayed locked on the saloon doors a moment longer before he finally turned to her. "Who were they?" she whispered. He exhaled slowly, the sound rough in his throat. "Men I used to ride with. Outlaws. I left that life behind. But it don't always leave you." Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing. She wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes stopped her, eyes that carried both guilt and fire. As they loaded supplies in silence, Clara knew two things for certain. Colt's past was darker than she imagined, and had just followed them home. Chapter 5, Firelight Confessions. The night air smelled of smoke and gunpowder. The outlaws had come just as Colt feared, creeping through the sagebrush at the edge of the ranch. Shots cracked through the darkness. Horses shrieked, and the corral shuddered with fear. Colt's rifle barked in answer, each blast lighting his face in quick, fierce flashes. Clara crouched low near the doorway, her heart hammering like a wild drum. She wanted to run, but her feet stayed planted. Watching Colt stand against them, steady as the earth, something stirred deep in her chest, fear, awe, and something more dangerous still. When the outlaws finally retreated into the night, their curses trailing on the wind, Colt staggered back toward the porch. His shoulder was bleeding, the dark stain spreading down his shirt. Clara gasped and rushed forward, catching his arm before he could fall. "Sit," she ordered, guiding him to the hearth inside. The fire crackled low, casting shadows across his face, hard and weary. She tore strips from her skirt with trembling hands and pressed them to the wound. Colt hissed, but didn't pull away. His eyes, those sharp blue eyes, watched her instead. "You're shaken," he murmured. "Of course I'm shaken," Clara whispered, pressing harder against the wound. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "They could have killed you." "They didn't," he said simply. Her hands faltered. For a moment neither spoke. The fire popped, filling the silence with sparks. Clara drew a ragged breath, her voice breaking as she finally confessed, "I know what it is to lose everything, to live with nothing but fear. My husband, he was cruel, left me beaten down, broken, and unable to bear children. I ran, but the scars stayed." Colt's jaw tightened, his gaze darkening, not with judgment, but with fury at a ghost he couldn't fight. Slowly, he reached up, his rough hand closing over hers where it pressed against his wound. "You ain't broken, Clara," he said, his voice rough as gravel but steady as the earth. "You survived. That's more strength than most men will ever know." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She lowered her gaze, but his hand lifted her chin until her eyes met his. "I told you once, and I'll tell you again," Colt continued. "You don't have to work yourself to the bone to earn a place here. You've done enough fighting for one lifetime. You can rest beside me now." The firelight flickered across his face, softening the lines of old battles, and in his eyes she saw not pity but something fiercer, warmer, something that set her trembling for an entirely different reason. Clara's breath caught as she whispered, "Colt," but words faded as silence deepened, the firelight wrapping them both in a fragile, dangerous intimacy. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel like a woman begging for scraps of life. She felt like someone wanted, not for what she could do, but for who she was. Chapter 6. A New Dawn at Red Rock. The prairie was quiet after the storm of violence. The outlaws hadn't returned, and word spread fast in Red Rock that Colt McGraw had stood his ground and sent them packing. Some folks whispered that trouble would circle back. But for now, peace lingered like the hush after a summer thunderstorm. Clara rose early, stepping out onto the porch as the first streaks of dawn lit the horizon. The land stretched wide and endless, the earth damp with dew, the air sharp with sage and wood smoke. For the first time in years, her chest didn't ache with dread. She breathed deep, filling her lungs with the promise of something new. Behind her, the door creaked, and Colt stepped out. His shirt hung loose with a bandage bound his shoulder, but he carried his coffee in one hand and leaned on the post with the other, as if he were carved right into the ranch itself. "You're up with the sun," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. Clara smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Old habits. When you've run as long as I have, dawn feels safer than night." He studied her a moment, eyes narrowed against the growing light. "You ain't running now." The words sank deep, warming her more than the sun climbing the horizon. She looked away, out at the horses grazing, their coats glistening gold in the light. "I thought I'd never stop," she admitted softly. "Never stop begging for a place. Never stop looking over my shoulder." Colt's boots shifted against the porch. "You don't have to beg here, Clara. Not for a place. Not for your worth. Not for me." She turned to him then, her heart hammering. His eyes held hers steady, the kind of look that stripped away all the fear and doubt she had carried. Slowly, as if afraid to break the moment, she reached for his hand. His palm was rough, scarred, a working man's hand, but when his fingers closed over hers, the touch was gentle. "You mean that?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I mean it," he said, firm as a vow. "I ain't a-skin you to be nothing but yourself. The past don't own you no more. Not while you're here with me." A silence stretched, filled only by the soft nicker of horses and the distant cry of a waking coyote. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but they were different this time, not of fear, but of release. As the sun broke fully over the prairie, painting the land in gold, Clara leaned against Colt's shoulder, resting her head there. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood strong beside her. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't running, wasn't begging. She was home, and beside her in the dusty, dangerous heart of the Wild West was a man who had chosen her, not as a burden, not as a shadow of her past, but as his equal in the dawn of new life. The sun sagged low over the red rock plains, spilling fire across the horizon. The air was heavy with the scent of sagebrush, the earth still warm beneath the hooves of grazing horses. From the distant town, faint saloon music drifted on the wind, mixing with the hush of cicadas. Clara stood at the corral fence, her skirts brushing the dust, watching the land glow in gold and crimson. She had spent months running, begging for a place, yet here, at Colt McGraw's side, she had found it. The ranch was quiet now, the outlaws gone, their ghosts burned away in gunpowder and grit. Colt walked up beside her, hat in hand, his bandaged shoulders stiff but his stride steady. For a long moment, they stood in silence, gazing at the endless sky. Then he reached for her hand, his fingers rough, certain. "You don't have to run any more, Clara," he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness like a promise. "This land's yours as much as it is mine, and so's my heart." Her eyes filled, though her smile was steady. She pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath. "Then I'll stop running," she whispered. "I'll rest right here beside you." As the last light bled over Prairie, Colt bent and kissed her, slow and sure, sealing the vow the land itself seemed to echo. Behind them, the horses stirred. The wind carried the scent of dust and freedom, and Red Rock's wild, dangerous world finally felt like home.